Welcome to MyShliach Story Hour Chassidim series. Okay, we are continuing to talk about the Chosid Reb Hillel Paritcher. You know, we already discussed how he became a Chosid, what brought him to the Alter Rebbe and later the Mittler Rebbe. And it's also interesting to note that the Tzemach Tzedek said that Reb Hillel Paritcher was actually only a half a Chosid. Half a Chosid? How can you be half a Chosid? I mean, we look at the kind of Mesiras Nefesh that he had to become a Chosid, because the other half of Reb Hillel Paritcher was actually, and get this, he was half Chosid, half Rebbe. That's something very, very, very powerful, and we're going to unpack that, Mir Hashem, in the coming episodes as we learn more about Reb Hillel Paritcher. Now, we spoke last time that Reb Hillel was not zeiche to meet the Alter Rebbe, but that did not deter him from his desire of wanting to become a Chassid, and he ended up becoming a Chassid of the Mittler Rebbe. In 1814, after the Napoleonic War, remember the story with the Alter Rebbe blowing shofar on Rosh Hashanah in the morning to see who's going to win the war, if Napoleon is going to win the war, or if the Tsar is going to win the war, and the Alter Rebbe wanted the Tsar to win the war, even though it's going to be harder for the Yidden begashmius, it will be better for the Yidden beruchnius, while other tzaddikim wanted Napoleon to win the war because he was promising a better life, a better physical life for the Jews, and they decided that whoever blows shofar Rosh Hashanah in the morning, their side is going to win, and the Alter Rebbe right away got up first thing in the morning and blew shofar. So during that war, although the Alter Rebbe didn't want to have anything to do with Napoleon, the Alter Rebbe ran away. He passed away while running away from Napoleon. The Alter Rebbe didn't want even his slippers to be caught in the hands of Napoleon. But after that war, in 1814, the Mittler Rebbe, who had just become Rebbe, established the settlements in the Kherson province of Ukraine. Now, Ukraine, Russia, this was all one empire at that time. And what did the Mittler Rebbe want by creating Yiddische Städtlach, Yiddische settlements in those provinces? Until then, the Yidden were poor peddlers. They would have to schlep from one town to another town, selling potatoes and selling what other schmattes they can get their hands on, rubber bands, ich weiß nicht, begging people to buy their stuff. And their livelihood, their sustenance, obviously everything comes from the Rebishter, but the way it manifests itself here in this world, they had to rely on the kindness of other people to buy their wares. And what the Mittler Rebbe established was communities and settlements of Yidden that can work the land, become farmers, have their own fields and produce their own food and become self-sufficient in a way that they'll be able to sell to others. They'll have what to live on with the Rebishter's bracha, and they'll be able to sell to others. This way they'll be able to make a normal living. Instead of having to schlep from one town to another town, you're going to be like the manufacturer. You're going to make the grain and the wheat and the potatoes and the tomatoes and the cucumbers and the onions and the garlic. Everything's going to grow from you. And hopefully they'll make enough money and they'll be able to live normally. So hundreds and later tens of thousands of families were able to earn a proper living because of this establishment that the Mittler Rebbe set up. Now, many Chassidim were among the first to listen to heed the call of the Mittler Rebbe to move to these settlements. And what was the driving force? What enticed them? What made them so excited to come move there? Besides the opportunity, begashmius, to be comfortable, the Mittler Rebbe promised that he would visit them personally every single year. The Mittler Rebbe hoped to be able to come every year and visit the Yidden over there. Now, you know that you're going to stay where you are and the Mittler Rebbe is going to come visit you. This is unbelievable. So, Chassidim and many simple people and a lot of people that barely knew anything about Yiddishkeit came and settled. It was a big mix, a big chalent. You had people that knew a lot and people that knew a little. Everybody was living in this settlement. In 1816, the Mittler Rebbe fulfilled his promise and came from Lubavitch and visited the area for 5 months. He came after Pesach and stayed until Elul. So the whole summer, the Mittler Rebbe was with the Yidden over there. Now, although the Mittler Rebbe said that he was going to come every single year, and the Mittler Rebbe was able to see how much the Yidden and the Chassidim and the people in the area benefited so much from having the Rebbe in their presence, the Mittler Rebbe realized that due to the Rebbe's other responsibilities and the Rebbe's health, he was unable to make the trip every year. And so, the Mittler Rebbe instructed Reb Hillel Paritcher to continue visiting the Cherson settlements on behalf of the Mittler Rebbe. So in 1818, 2 years after the Mittler Rebbe's first visit, the Mittler Rebbe tasked Hillel Paritcher to become his personal shliach, his personal representative, to go visit the Yidden in these areas and represent the Rebbe. Reb Hillel was known as a shadar. A shadar had, and I think we spoke about this about Reb Shmuel Munkis, also about what a shadar is. The shadar has two primary functions. Number one, he has to collect gashmias, and he plants ruchnias. What does it mean to collect gashmias and plant ruchnias? The job of a shadar is to collect tzedakah, to collect money for the Rebbe, so the Rebbe can use to give out the tzedakah, to use for different things that a Rebbe sees fit to spend the money on, and at the same time to be mechazik the Yidden that you're meeting and help them out in their Avodas Hashem, in their Shmiras Torah mitzvahs. Now, generally, the money that a shadar collected would be given to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe would decide what to do with it. But not with Reb Hillel. Reb Hillel was not only tasked with visiting the Yidden and inspiring them beruchnias and collecting the money. The Mittler Rebbe told Reb Hillel that he would also be in charge of distributing the funds. There were three main things that the Mittler Rebbe wanted Reb Hillel to do with the money. Number one is to make sure that there was kosher food in these settlements. And if that means to hire shachtim that were Yirei Shamayim and to train them and to pay them, that's what the money that Reb Hillel Paritcher collected would go for. To pay these shachtim so that the Yidden would have kosher flesh. And soon we're going to hear a story about what some of these very simple Yidden considered to be the laws of kashrus. Something that I don't think any of you ever imagined this would be one of the halachas in kashrus. Another thing that the Mittler Rebbe wanted the money to be used for was to help the Kantonistim, the Yiddish soldiers, the Kantonistim. Who are they? So what happened was, during that time, in an attempt to take away the Yiddishkeit from the Yiddish Kinder, there was the Gezeira of the Kantonistim. Who are the Kantonistim? Yiddish Kinderlach. 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old were chapped away from their tatis and their mammies and forced to go work in the Tsar's army for 20 years. Could you imagine a boy, a girl being pulled out of yeshiva, of their Yiddish school, where they're erst beginning to learn Chumash, Gemara, Mishnayos, and some of them erst beginning to learn how to read, and they're being pulled away, kicking and screaming, "Tati, don't let them take me away! Mommy, save me!" And the big Russian soldiers of the Tsar would grab these boys, mainly the boys, I'm not so sure about the girls, take the boys away and treat them like goyim and train them to be loyal soldiers of the Tsar and to work in the army for 20 years. Now they get pulled out of yeshiva. They don't take a siddur with them, a chumash, a mishnayos, a gemara, a tanya, nothing. So imagine, for 20 years, since they're 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, they don't see another frumi yid, they don't see a sefer Torah, they don't see a mezuzah, a pushka, a chumash, nothing. And the plan of it was that the kinderlach should forget about Yiddishkeit. Instead of trying to hurt them and kill the Yidden, although some goyim were doing that too, they said, we're just going to take them away when they're very young. They'll forget about Torah mitzvahs. By the time they're 25, 30, 40 years old, they're not going to know anything about Torah mitzvahs, and they won't be able to live their life as from a Yidden. And they're going to marry goyim, Rachman al-Islan, and they're going to raise their kinder to be goyim, and then we'll get rid of all the Yidden. That was the plan. And these soldiers were called the Kantonistim. And there's many, many, many interesting stories, fascinating stories about the Kantonistim out there. Mittler Rebbe and the Tzemach Tzedek helped them. And even the Mesiras Nefesh that they had, there's a shul in Rostov. I think it's the only shul that survived World War II, is the shul that the Kantonistim built because they didn't feel comfortable in any other shul. When they finally came back after 20 years of service in the Tsar's army, they didn't feel comfortable going to the regular shul. They were a bunch of Amaratzim, so they built their own shul. But that's a story for another time. So these Kantonistim, these soldiers, a lot of them were stationed in the city of Bobroisk. And because Reb Hillel Paritcher lived close to the city of Bobroisk, the Mittler Rebbe wanted him to spend as much money as needed to help these Yiddish soldiers in any way possible, to try to get them Sidurim or Chumashim or Kasher Essen or anything that they needed to try to help them and mimechazik their Yiddishkeit. And the third thing the Mittler Rebbe wanted Reb Hillel to use the money for was for the mitzvah of Pidyon Shvuyim. We all know many stories about the Moshke that had a krechma, he had an inn, and he couldn't pay the rent, and the Paritch took him and his family and threw him into jail and said, if you don't pay me so much and so much money, I'm not going to let you out. Reb Hillel's job was to go around, try to free these Yidden, the mitzvah of Pidyon Shvuyim. And when the Mittler Rebbe was telling this to Reb Hillel, the Mittler Rebbe was explaining and being mitayer to him the experience that the Mittler Rebbe had during his visit to the Kherson region. And the Mittler Rebbe told Reb Hillel to visualize, imagine in his head, the scene. You have two Chassidishe farmers standing in their fields, wearing yarmulke and tzitzis on top of their shirts, and they're praising the Eibishter while working in the fields. They don't have to beg anybody for parnasa, and they lift their eyes to the Shamayim, thanking the Eibishter. And the Mittler Rebbe said, Reb Hillel, this is what it says in the pasuk: Su'u morei meinechem. Su'u morei meinechem. The Mittler Rebbe said, this is the true meaning of the word Shema. Shin, Mem, Ayin is Rosh Tevis. Su'u morei meinechem. Lift your eyes to the heavens. And Reb Hillel had a very good chush hatzir, and he was very vividly able to visualize these concepts that the Mittler Rebbe was telling him. And then Reb Hillel asked the Mittler Rebbe, he said, Rebbe, the Yidden that are living there are very simple Yidden in these towns and villages. Is it kedai for me? Does it make sense for me to share with them words of Chassidus? To share the deep concepts, the deep maimorim that the Mittler Rebbe says? Should I share with them? And the Rebbe said, yes, absolutely. Because even though they may not understand, the neshama understands. And the neshama is what gives chayis to the guf. So by feeding the neshama, the chassidus, that's in a sense giving chayis to the guf as well. So kindalach, whenever you hear somebody chazering a maimer or a sicha or watching a video of the Rebbe and you see the Rebbe saying a sicha and you think to yourself, I don't understand. There's no subtitles. I can't read the English. Why should I bother listening to a Farbrengen? Why should I bother listening to Dvar Torah, listening to a Maimer, to a Sicha, learning Tanya Balpeh? I don't understand what I'm saying. Your neshama understands. Your neshama understands, and the neshama gives the chayis to the guf. And with time, eventually, your guf will be able to understand and appreciate it also. And so, Reb Hillel set out and visited these towns to bring them the warmth and the chayis and the varmkeit of Yiddishkeit and of Chassidus. And Reb Hillel would go visit these towns on a yearly basis. He would start his journey after Pesach, and then he would go to Lubavitch for Lag Baimer and Shavuos, and then he would go to these colonies in Ukraine, to the Kherson region, and come back to Lubavitch for Tishrei. Sometimes the trip would take longer, sometimes it would take shorter, but between 4 to 6 months, Reb Hillel was not home. He was busy traveling around. And you can imagine how excited the Chassidim and the Yidden were when Reb Hillel would come to visit them. It was the biggest honor for them to have such a holy person, such a varme, edele person come visit them, especially he's coming on behalf of the Mittler Rebbe. And remember, Reb Hillel Paritcher wasn't stam a guy going around collecting tzedakah. He was a half a Rebbe, like the Tzemach Tzedek says. He was able to give brachas. He was able to be mechazik the Yidden and uplift them. And because Reb Hillel had such a connection with so many people, that's why we know so many stories about him, because of the many interactions that Reb Hillel had. Now, the first two episodes that we're discussing Reb Hillel, we're talking about his personality and his shlichus, so we can get an idea of who this chassid was. In the coming episodes, we're going to have more stories about Reb Hillel, not so much background on his personality, but more stories, so stay tuned. Reb Hillel did this shlichus. I think he got it when he was very young, probably in his 20s, for 40-something years, until he passed away. He was übergegeben to the shlichus that the Mittler Rebbe gave him until 1864 on Yud Aleph Av, on Shabbos Nachamu Parshas Veschanon. He passed away in Cherson, and that's where Reb Hillel was actually buried. He did shlichus from the Mittler Rebbe all the way through the times of the Tzemach Tzedek. In the next episode, we're going to share some more interesting stories about Reb Hillel and his journeys, and more about his personality.